Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Great Reassessment Podcast. My name is Matthew Mastronardi. I am super excited about today's guest, Vijay Boyapati, who is the author of The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. He's a former engineer with Google. And Vijay, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I followed you for quite some time. And then reading your book, I'd only followed you on the internet. And then, when I got to meet you in person in Cle Elum, it was a really interesting moment for me just because, when you only see somebody online or on TV and, next thing we're orange pilling our bartender together. And it was like, that was just so fun. And so I'm really grateful, to have met you and, speak to you today.
It was good timing as well. I can't remember what the price was when we were orange pilling her, but I hope she kept those Bitcoins. She would have had a pretty good gain on them.
Yeah, we told her, like, do not sell these for at least a year. So,
and the thing I liked about it is that I feel like Bitcoiners are generous people by their nature, and everyone gave her a pretty big tip, I remember, and so she got a pretty significant amount of Bitcoin. It's such a fun thing to orange pill someone in that way and say, hey, check this out. You've got your wallet set up. You've got some Bitcoins now. And seeing someone start their journey is always awesome for me.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And she got a signed copy of your book, which is awesome.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. My wife, she sells homemade tallow butter or body butter. So like
that's awesome. I need to buy some.
Yeah, well, I can hook you up. But we were at a craft fair a couple weeks ago, and the booth that was next to us, this gentleman was selling this really like awesome spices and for like meat and things. And I convinced him to let me buy some in Bitcoin. And then I saw him a couple weeks later at the next craft fair, and he goes, dude, my Bitcoin is like, I sold it to you for $30, now it's worth $40. And I go, dude, just imagine if all your customers paid you in Bitcoin over the last few years. So it's a good way, and they see the number go up a little bit. It's kind of exciting for them.
For sure.
So in the last 30 days, I've lost count of all the new all-time highs. Trump won the election. You have all this talk of strategic Bitcoin reserves and, what's going on at the state level and things like that. And so, the list could go on, but I wanted to ask you, what makes this moment right now so pivotal for Bitcoin?
I mean, there are so many catalysts that are behind us now. The wind is really in our sails. The Federal Reserve is pivoting. We have a president and an administration that's very, very friendly towards Bitcoin, and a Congress that's very friendly towards Bitcoin. And I would say, though, that my summary is that what makes this moment really important is that Bitcoin has finally achieved political capture. And I always viewed the big risk to Bitcoin going forward as nation-state attack. And I used to talk to people about this for the last few years, and I said, I think this question will be answered in the next 5 years, whether Bitcoin gets enough grassroots support that the political establishment see that there's really no benefit in attacking Bitcoin, and they become friendly to Bitcoin. And that really happened in this election cycle, where you had both presidential candidates courting the Bitcoin vote. And one presidential candidate, the winner actually, Trump, went to the Bitcoin conference and said a number of things which are very, very friendly towards Bitcoin. And so I think this question that I had posed has been answered. The other side of it was that, the establishment recognized the risk that Bitcoin poses towards the dollar's status as the world reserve currency, and they would fight back. And I didn't know which way it would go. I would tell people, honestly, this is an open question. It's a real risk. And people who invest in Bitcoin should at least know about this risk. I think this question has been answered now, that we do have real political capture, and that the political establishment sees that there's actually a really large benefit in promoting Bitcoin-friendly policies and courting the Bitcoin vote. And actually, now we've grown to be a pretty significant demographic, and especially significant, not just because of the size of our demographic as, people who care about Bitcoin as a technology and as a financial platform, not just that that's growing, but the fact that the people who are in this demographic tend to be very independent-minded voters. We're not hyper-partisan, like ultra-right-wing, don't care about like anything, always vote in one direction, or ultra-left-wing, only vote for Democrats every time. We tend to be people who are independent, pragmatic, try and figure out each issue in and of itself. And I feel like that is the most important demographic if you are running, a political campaign, because really this country is so polarized that there's only a tiny fraction of the country that actually decides elections. And you have to be pretty open-minded and independent-minded to, understand Bitcoin, because it really, it bends conventional wisdom in a number of different ways. And so what I've found in my experience is the people who have come to Bitcoin early, as anyone who's listening to this podcast is a very early adopter of Bitcoin, you really have to be able to think outside the box. And so that gives you, the great benefit of being able to understand Bitcoin, but it also makes you very attractive for a politician, because you're one of the very small group of people whose mind can be changed. So I think we have a lot of political sway, much more than people really appreciate. And I think Trump got it. I think he appreciated that. And I think he really did the smart thing. And he courted the vote, showed that we matter, showed that the policies that we care about will be considered. And he said some things, that I think really resonated with Bitcoiners, in particular, like freeing Ross Ulbricht on day one. And I really hope he does that, because that was a promise made. It better be a promise kept, because it's something that people in this space really care about, that there was such an injustice done to a young man whose only crime was to create a website, really, that allowed people who wanted to voluntarily interact with each other. Sure, they were doing drugs, but it was voluntary, and people knew what they were getting into. And it was safe as well. It made, for people who were, looking to purchase drugs, it was much safer than doing it on the streets. So I hope that Trump comes through on his word with that one, and that would be a very good sign, because he made a lot of other promises too that relate to Bitcoin. And if he keeps his word on that one, it'll be a good sign that the other ones are going to come through as well.
Yeah. I think, what was it? He just celebrated his 40th birthday last week or something. It was recent. Yeah, that would be amazing if, there's a few people he could pardon, honestly.
There's a lot. Yeah, not just Bitcoin related, but what happened on January 6th. There were a lot of people who got, caught up in that, really, who weren't doing anything wrong. They were just expressing their frustration with what happened during the political process, and ended up with criminal records because of it. So I think there are a lot of people who deserve clemency, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that comes through.
Yeah. I mean, did you see President Joe Biden yesterday? He pardoned Hunter Biden.
Yeah, unbelievable, because to me, that's the opposite of someone who is, acting innocently, expressing their right as they have to free speech and expressing their frustration about something. It's the opposite to that, because it's someone who committed a real crime, and there's real, I think, harm done to the country, like the influence, peddling the influence he had with his father to foreign countries, and to issue a pardon that was a blanket pardon. It wasn't like, oh, you committed this one crime, the gun charges or tax evasion, I'm going to pardon you for that. It was like, I will give you a pardon for 10 years on anything you did. It's unbelievable. I don't think that's ever happened in American history, that a president has given a blanket pardon for a period of a decade for anything that anyone has done, like that we may not even know about, right? Like,
Yeah.
what if this guy was, a pedophile or something, and he's pardoning those crimes? It is shocking, and it really is, I think, just a last measure of how corrupt that this current administration is, and we are all so lucky that they are gone,
Yeah.
and we're not dealing with another 4 years of this nonsense.
Yeah. It sort of, I can't remember where I heard it, but it sort of feels like, the frost is thawing after a long winter. We're coming out of a dark winter, and you can see the frost melting. I think that's a Chronicles of Narnia reference. But it certainly feels that way, right?
So true, and I get that all over the place. There's a sort of rising sense of hope, like this the Reagan line of "It's morning in America again." I really feel like people feel that way. It feels like we have hope again that our country can return to its ideals of freedom, property rights, the rule of law, and it would be a really great thing if we could.
So, I agree with what you said about, Bitcoiners having a lot of political sway now. And, from the last few meetups we've had here in town, we have people who are historically Democrat, historically Libertarian, historically Republican. And you're right. It's like each of these people, each of them are, we're thinking deeper about issues. And we have an event coming up where we have a good handful of lawmakers, hopefully on both sides. However, yet I get that some of the Democrats who, they're not happy about this election. And so it's almost like, they want to sort of piss on the parade because, like, you know, rejecting invitations, not wanting to learn about something that's entirely unrelated to Donald Trump, but because there's like a corollary of association, it's like, so I hope that they can get over that, at least to some of them.
Well, they will by necessity, Matthew. They will by necessity, because a party which rejects common sense is a party that will be out of power for a very long time. And I think what you will see, this is sort of similar to the Reagan Revolution. I mean, Reagan and then Bush Sr. together were in power for 12 years. And the Democrats were out in the wilderness for that entire time. And what the Democrats needed to do was they needed to retool and figure out like how to appeal to America, because America politically is a very moderate, slightly conservative country. So I would say center right, if you were to describe America as center right. And what happens is if the Democrats try to pull the country to where it fundamentally isn't, to make it far left, what you have is a massive pendulum swing back the other direction. But ultimately, the Democrats, the way they came back from this massive, long period of being out of power, was that they retooled and they brought back a moderate candidate in Bill Clinton, who actually shared a lot of the policy ideas of Reagan. And I think what will happen over the next few years, certainly these coming 4 years, is you're going to have a civil war in the Democratic Party. And that civil war is going to be, what does the Democratic Party want to be? Does it want to be a party of these extreme policy positions and woke ideology? Or does it want to be a party that represents where the country is, which is basically a fairly moderate country? And what needs to happen is the people who are in power within the Democratic Party basically need to be booted out. And that's going to be a very painful process for the Democrats to come to terms with that. And I don't think it's going to happen immediately. These things can take, 8, 10, 12 years to happen. And I think what you'll see, like you're saying, is that these politicians may reject Bitcoin and say, we don't want to be involved in anything related to Trump. Okay, go ahead, do that. You're just not going to be in power. And you'll stay out of power for a long time until you come around to the fact that the population is somewhere that you are not. And that's one of the healthy things I think about American society, is that politicians need to find out where people are at rather than tell them where they should be.
Yeah. You know, traditionally, the left likes to market themselves as, the people who like to look out for the little guy, the one who doesn't have any resources, and the unbanked. And, what better resource than Bitcoin to help somebody who doesn't have identification, who doesn't have a bank account, but who might have access to the internet. Um, it seems like that's like the perfect remedy for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Bitcoin is one of the most empowering technologies for people who are disconnected from the financial system, because the financial system is essentially built for and by the elites, and they get to decide who participates in the financial system. It's a very anti-democratic system in a lot of ways. And you can see this actually I mean, there's a big story on Twitter right now the last week. Uh, Mark Andreessen, who's a very famous venture capitalist who created Netscape and, was an early investor in a bunch of very successful companies. He explained how this concept of debanking works, right? Where the financial system gets political pressure to remove certain groups who are disfavored. And this has happened over the last 4 years, in particular to Bitcoiners, people who own Bitcoin and who may have sold some Bitcoin and made some money for Bitcoin. Their banks were just giving them letters like, you no longer have a bank account here. Go somewhere else. We don't want you anymore. And that's devastating, right? Having a bank account is such a critical part of being part of the financial system. And it was used as a tool, a political tool. It wasn't just like a financial thing like, oh, you did something criminal, or you're using our system in a way that's not allowed. It's just like, you have beliefs that we don't like and we're going to get you out of the... They're basically doing to US citizens what they're doing to nation states like Iran. They're treating US citizens like Iran. And it's like, this is not what America is about. And Bitcoin really helps that, right? Like, if you have Bitcoin, you have something of value that cannot be taken away from you and that you can transact with anyone. Like, when we were at that bar in Cle Elum, there was a waitress and we could give her Bitcoin, something of value. Even if I didn't have a bank account, I could still do that. But it is very, very troubling to see the financial system being used in a political way. And I really hope one of the things that changes over the next 4 years is that mentality, and the people responsible for it are just completely wiped away. Because Bitcoin is a multi-decade project. We still need a banking system. We still have tens of millions of people who need it to function with their lives. And I think it's one of the scariest things I've seen in the last few decades being done to people in America.
So, what are you this cycle we're in, and 2025 and on, what are you most looking forward to about 2025 and maybe finishing out this cycle?
Uh, I think what I really look forward to as a general thing is that Bitcoin achieves critical mass. I think it's become sort of this global macro asset where it's competing with gold as the global non-sovereign store of value. And I think that'll happen this cycle, where people will look at Bitcoin and say, even nation states will look at Bitcoin and say, we want to have some significant amount of savings. And actually, it was difficult for large institutions and for nation states to consider this even, 4, 5, 6 years ago, because Bitcoin wasn't big enough. If you're a nation state and you're trying to invest in something, if it's worth of maybe a few $100 billion, it's just not big enough, because it's like, it's a small puddle and you can't like step in the small puddle because your foot is going to knock all of the water out in a sense. But as that puddle becomes like, a lake or then an ocean, of course you can put your foot in and you're not going to affect it. And that's really what nation states and big institutions are looking for. It's for Bitcoin to become large enough to have critical mass that it's an asset that they can invest in. And I think that's going to happen this cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be, I don't know if you saw Dennis Porter, he tweeted something the other day about China. claiming that they have just uncovered like the world's biggest gold reserve in their country. You know, something that we don't know how much gold there really is in the crust of the earth. But you know how much Bitcoin there is, and you know, I look forward to that as well. It's like what countries are we going to see in 2025 that come out and say, hey, yeah, we're stacking Bitcoin, or we've been stacking Bitcoin quietly, and yeah, we're ready to, back up our currency with this.
Yeah, it's an incredible time to be a Bitcoiner. You're certainly giving one of the most important comparative advantages of Bitcoin versus gold is that we know its supply. Uh, and one of the things I have had for a very long time, almost since I first got into Bitcoin, the thing that I've always had very high conviction about is that Bitcoin is better than gold. The question of whether it goes all the way to becoming a reserve currency, I think there's more uncertainty around that. But I have so much certainty that Bitcoin is superior to gold that I have always believed that there will be some point at which Bitcoin overtakes gold as the premier non-sovereign store of value. And to do that at gold's current market capitalization, Bitcoin would probably have to get to around $800,000. And I certainly think that's possible in this cycle or the next. If it's not this cycle, I think it'll be very certainly the next cycle that Bitcoin gets to those levels.
I mean, look at, when the world ran on gold and wars had to be funded on currencies that were backed by gold, how long did they last? They were way shorter than they are today, maybe a couple years max, but they usually ended, when the weather started to get cold, or you couldn't continue to fund it, or the people got fed up. And, Bitcoin is a peaceful instrument in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's morally, that's one of the things that motivates me most about Bitcoin is that it really will make it hard to fund warfare. And if you think about where did central banks come from, they were ultimately the creation of, the nation state to fund warfare, to make it easier to fund warfare, to have a central bank that lent the nation's capital to the state so that it could conduct war. And this was, the innovation, so to speak, of the Bank of England when it got created, was to fund the war with France. And that's really the template that's been used by all nations since then, is the Bank of England model. So to go back to a monetary standard where you can't inflate the money supply, it makes it much harder to fund warfare, because the way you'll have to fund it if you are on a Bitcoin standard is you couldn't inflate the money supply. You can't create more Bitcoin, so you have to go and tax people. And generally, populations are very unreceptive to the idea of their money being taken to fund a war that's not necessary. Sure, I think most people would support the idea of defending their country if their country was under attack. But very few people support the idea of using their nation's resources to go invade another country or cause harm in another country. And it's very expensive to do that. And so when you're taxing people, taking money directly out of their pocket, they're even less friendly. So I think from an economic perspective, the incentive for warfare is greatly diminished on a hard money standard. And that's one of the things that I'm hopeful about if Bitcoin becomes a reserve currency of the world.
Yeah. Have you always been politically savvy, politically minded, historically minded? Like when you were growing up, was politics something that you cared about, or the political arena?
Not really. I mean, when I was very young, I think I enjoyed the theater of politics, and the characters involved. I grew up in Australia, and I really didn't have any political beliefs. Even through university, and that's a place where a lot of people get indoctrinated with political beliefs. But I had a very sort of rigorous program in university, which didn't expose me to any of the politics that people get exposed to at university. I did pure mathematics and computer science, and there's really no space for politics in those subjects. And I was heads down when I was at university. I really was focused on doing as well as I could. So I was not exposed at all going through school. And then I came to America and I didn't really have any political ideology at all. maybe you'd say I was slightly left wing because that was kind of, you know, the default political milieu in Australia is slightly left wing, and so I had that, but I didn't really have any strong beliefs about anything. And then I came to Google and I came across some people who were libertarian, and I distinctly remember one of my friends lent me a VHS tape of Ayn Rand being interviewed by Phil Donahue in the 1970s, and I put it in the player and I pressed play and I watched it. And it honestly felt like being hit by a bolt of lightning. I had never had the feeling of someone explaining ideas in a very logical, reasonable way. And she was this, kind of old, wizened Russian woman, very small, sitting in front of this very large, hostile, liberal audience, and getting very hostile questions from Phil Donahue, who is also very liberal, but sitting there calmly and explaining using reason her ideas. And I'd never seen anything like that before. And then I, got another VHS tape from that friend, which was Milton Friedman. And then eventually I came across the Austrian economists and their point of view. And I really went down the rabbit hole after that. And so I think it was my exposure to libertarians when I was at Google that triggered my interest in economics. I'd always had an interest in history, but it was just, what wasn't tied to politics. But after being exposed to libertarianism, then I connected politics and economics and history all together, and I spent many, many years doing a deep dive on all three.
Milton Friedman was a big influence on me too. I got exposed to some of his, there's the old recordings that he would do, like those.
Free to choose?
Yeah, those are so good. And so I was a little hurt when in the Bitcoin Standard, Saif Moose sort of criticizes him a bit, critiques him, I should say, and he makes great arguments, but I was a little, just because he was so influential to me, it was like, no, don't make.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The Austrians, I think that criticism that Saif is pointing towards Milton Friedman comes from Murray Rothbard. Murray Rothbard was an Austrian economist who criticized Milton Friedman a lot about various things. And I think, the difference is Milton Friedman was more of a traditional economist, but with a free market mindset, whereas Murray Rothbard was like a full-on anarchist, like abolish the state, we don't need the state. And so he would criticize Milton Friedman from that perspective. And the thing I found interesting was I always found Murray Rothbard's criticisms of Milton Friedman so much more compelling than the criticisms Milton Friedman got from the other end, like from the statist economists, like the Keynesians. Those criticisms always felt very weak to me. But then I heard Murray Rothbard and people like Saif, and some of those criticisms did resonate with me. Milton Friedman was responsible for creating the withholding tax, which is like a very unlibertarian thing to create, that money's automatically taken out of your paycheck instead of the government coming to you and saying, you owe this tax, you got to pay the tax. Because it makes it easier for the state as a whole to grow. If the state takes money in a way that you don't really have any control over, and you don't even notice, a lot of people don't even notice it, then it's a little bit more insidious. It's kind of like inflation in a way. That's much more insidious than direct taxation.
Yeah, that's interesting that some of the tax, because Milton Friedman, he would dance circles around, like liberals all day, but when you go a little bit deeper in that Austrian school, like, and just the principles of freedom in general, it can be, that's where I can totally see that. So the goal of this podcast is to highlight the current times that we're in. And it can be kind of challenging to describe, but it certainly feels that this whole post-COVID era sort of led to a great awakening of sorts, which I call, the Great Reassessment, meaning that everyday Americans are have lost a lot of trust in the traditional institutions that they relied upon at one point. And so people are turning for more reliable sources that they trust. It's because trust has been broken. So it's truly a renaissance of sorts. Perhaps the most evident example of this is with health and diet. I've never seen so many people interested or have a renewed interest in improving their diet. They're checking ingredients and they're realizing, yeah, I shouldn't be eating this chemical or tartrazine, which, RFK posted in that video he just recently of talking about tartrazine and yellow 5 and how it is a byproduct of coal mining. And people are so excited that, Trump nominated him to be the Director of Health and Human Services, and just this interest in getting Americans healthy again. And so I see people captivated with that everywhere. And then I guess another one is, just the people thinking about the ethics of money and, who controls the money and what can I do to protect my time and labor? And what is fiat currency? And so there's like all these areas I can go on, but so I guess like what, if you could give some cultural commentary on what the heck you think is happening with, is this an intellectual movement? Is it similar to a renaissance? Like, what do you think is going on?
Yeah, I think that's the right word for it, and I've written about this on Twitter a little bit. I think we live in a renaissance for autodidacts. That is, anyone who is curious and interested in learning can learn about anything. And we have the capacity now to become, near experts on any topic, even if we were not, classically trained or went through university. That's a very, very powerful thing. I think we really have the internet to thank for it, because the internet disintermediated the way in which people received information. It no longer through these elite institutions like newspapers, the traditional media like newspapers and these television stations, which really controlled the narrative of how people thought, and there was no way to get kind of alternative perspectives. The internet really freed us up, but that process takes decades, right? And we're still going through that process. And I think the great thing is that you're seeing some of these, the flourishing of people's understanding of the world happening right now. And that's one thing I really care about as well, is like health and having this information now available that people can question. Like, why has testosterone in men dropped dramatically in the last 25 years? Like scary numbers. And even if you don't have an answer, even asking the question is very powerful, right? You don't have like these institutions like the establishment media just ignoring the question. Like, this is an incredibly important question that human functioning, that the male population, and actually I should say it's not just men, it's women. Women have testosterone as well. This is something I learned recently. And the decrease in testosterone amongst women is a huge issue as well. And once you ask the question, then you can sort of look for answers, like how do you improve testosterone? Well, there are a couple of easy tricks. You should get better sleep. You should do resistance training. You should lift heavy things. That is a good way of improving testosterone. And you should avoid eating poison. That's not that crazy, right? Like, don't eat poison. Oh, wait a second. Poison is everywhere. It's everywhere. And if you have kids and you can't devote too much time to thinking about what they eat, your kids are being exposed to poison every single day. Like, go into a grocery store and like randomly point at food, like just randomly choose 5 items of food and look at the ingredient list. They will have all sorts of junk in there: high fructose corn syrup, canola oil, coloring, just junk everywhere. And it's actually really, really hard to go to a grocery store and not find something that's junk. You have to be very intentional. You have to stick to basically like the fresh produce area. Like if you get out of there, then you're in trouble already. Uh, and so has a huge impact on our society in so many different ways. Like our children have problems like ADHD, which is probably just a result of poor diet, lack of exercise, lack of exposure to the sun. Uh, uh, but we now have a chance to fix it because we now have people asking that question. And it reminds me, I sort of saw the first inklings of this in 2007 when I was campaigning for Ron Paul. And suddenly you had this person who was out in the wilderness for, 20 years, and the mainstream media didn't give a shit about Ron Paul. And they didn't show him any attention, but the fact that you could find him on the internet and people could look up his ideas and read about him, and then they were like, oh, wait a second, what's this Federal Reserve thing? Why does it exist? Why do they control our money? What authority gave them the ability to manipulate our money supply? And then suddenly these ideas, which had, he had planted these seeds decades ago, started to blossom. And now they're commonplace. People are asking these questions all over the place. And so it's a multi-decade process. The fact that RFK now has this platform and is going to be talking about this, I think we don't see the full fruits of his work for at least 2 decades. I think there will be some changes, but it's the awakening and the understanding in the population that really matters, that people start questioning these things and saying, do I want to give my kids poison for lunch? Probably not.
Another area that you see is sort of this renewal of masculine virtue. And I'm not talking about influencers and like the Andrew Tates of the world, but I'm just talking like there is men want to be courageous and productive, and they want to build, and they want to provide for their families. Like that's always been like the expectation, but there's sort of like an excitement about it now. And like if you're no longer like the weird guy if you say like, no, you know what? I want to provide, or I want to protect. Like these are I wouldn't say we're all the way there, like we're celebrating these virtues yet, but they're on the rise. And so like the softness of our culture, I think it's finally dying. And that is like it's okay to be manly, whereas like the roots of feminism have poisoned the well, a long time ago, and we're just finally starting to like clean that out. And that's probably one of the most encouraging things that I see right now.
Yeah, one of the things that really bothered me is this idea of sort of vilifying boys for being boys, and that male nature is something that needs to be sort of stricken from the earth. And I think these virtues that you're talking about, to provide, to protect, and to achieve, I think these are hardwired into the sort of male form of humans. Like you just have them, and the fact that they're suppressed and not sort of encouraged, it really dampens people's enthusiasm about life and the world. And like unleashing that unleashes so much optimism and so much positive energy into the world. Because I think one thing that it really, I believe, is hardwired into men is this desire to see what's around the corner, or climb the highest mountain, or to build something, or to there's such a strong desire in us to achieve, and as a byproduct of achieving, to provide, right? And unleashing that is good for all humanity, and suppressing it has been really harmful for humanity. It's really been suppressed very strongly for the last decade, I would say, if not longer than that. And I agree that it's a hopeful time that those virtues now can be celebrated again.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here, um, just on the food thing, going back to that really quick, have you ever heard of Azure Standard?
No.
My gosh, dude, you have to get on it. So it's an online food catalog, and they have just like a ton of products. Like pretty much, if you can find it in a grocery store, it's probably on Azure, and it's spelled Azure, Azure Standard. But they have all organic, like natural food products, and they can keep the cost down because food is delivered on a truck to a neighborhood drop site, and normal folks go and they help unload the truck, and you sort through all the food, and it might take like 30 to 40 minutes, but it's amazing. We have been able to source, just because, I have 3 kids now. My wife just gave birth last week, and
Congratulations.
thank you. So it's really important to us that they are not eating yellow 5, red 40, and canola oil, because that stuff is poison. And so,
Have you heard of a company called US Wellness Meats? That's one that I've used for a long time. They source only like completely grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and it's from local farms. They deliver as well. It's a website that I've really enjoyed using for several years now. But it obviously only focuses on like basically meat, like chicken, beef, pork. Yeah, so you can find, for instance, bacon that doesn't have nitrates in it. So, which is really hard to find. It's very hard to go to a grocery store and not find bacon that's been cured with nitrates. So that's one that I like, and I'll certainly check out this one that you're talking about as well. It's great to see that there's a flourishing there, and part of that is related to the fact that there's an awakening, right? Like these businesses couldn't exist unless there was demand for them, and there is demand because people are starting to say, "Hey, I don't want junk in my kids' food or in my food, because my body is my temple, and I want to take care of it."
Yeah, no, and Hippocrates said, "Let medicine be thy food, and food be thy medicine." That what you eat is really important, and so yeah, it could all be in vain because no one, our days are numbered. You could get, God forbid, hit by a car, and you just, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be a good steward of the body you've been given. So I'll take a look at Wellness Meats, and you let me know what you think of Azure. Last thing is, what would you say to young people, like specifically high schoolers, about how should they think about Bitcoin? And if you could give just, when do you think we're going to hit 100K?
100K, that's a tough question. I'm always so hesitant to give price predictions, but I feel fairly confident that we got so close. I think it's almost fair to say we did hit 100K. We got to 99.8. So, but to actually hit it on some exchange, I feel fairly confident it'll be this year. So we'll see how that goes. For young people, this message I guess I would give is more than just for Bitcoin. Just be curious. Be curious about the world. That alone puts you so far ahead of everyone else. Like, there aren't that many people who are curious about the world, and we do live in a renaissance for autodidacts. You can learn anything you want. If you have curiosity, it gives you a lot of power because you can figure out these big things. So, take your curiosity and use it to figure out money, use it to figure out history, use it to figure out economics, politics. There are all these great fields out there. I'm not an economist. I didn't go to university to learn economics, but I taught myself economics, and that helped me understand Bitcoin, and certainly been very valuable to me and my family. You have the opportunity to teach yourself anything you want. So just be passionate and be curious, and the rest will figure itself out.
Well, Vijay, thank you so much for your time. I am incredibly grateful. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. If you haven't already, please check out his book, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. Give it a read. You won't regret it. Vijay, thanks again so much.
Awesome seeing you, Matthew.